Today I'm going to talk about how every political ideology thinks that its system would work, but the problem is the way that people are going about it. So with capitalism, people blame how the government is functioning. With socialism, they blame capitalism. With libertarianism, they blame too much regulation, right? There's always a problem with the system or with the other system that makes it so that things don't work. But in reality, the problem isn't the systems, it's the people. It's human beings, it's our desires and the way that we behave. And that is really shown through the book that I'm going to use to talk about this idea today, which is Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed. There's definitely going to be spoilers in this video. If you don't want to know anything about The Dispossessed, then you should go read it and then watch this afterwards to talk about some political ideas from Le Guin. This is one of the smartest political novels I've ever read, where I think Le Guin is really presenting human nature well and looking at how we create problems and successes in political systems. Starting out, I want to think about how political systems seem to idealize human beings. They often present humans as this one type of thing with this major point of desire or this major way that we all behave. And if we can understand that and accept it, then we would all bring upon this system that would work wonderfully for us, right? So with capitalism, the idea is ambition. If we would just see, we all have this desire to accumulate things, wealth or power or objects, materials, whatever. There's things that we want, even status, right? We want something. And if we can get it, if we know there's an avenue to it, then we will be ambitious. And that's how we will work in this type of system and how this type of system will work to benefit people. In communism, it assumes a type of cooperation that everybody or most people would be willing to go along with in order so that we wouldn't need this overarching government that tells us what to do, or we wouldn't need wealth to strive for and status to strive for to get us to do things, because we would cooperate and recognize that cooperation makes everyone's life better, and so we would do it. In anarchism, there's often a sense of personal responsibility that we would have and maintain in a system that would keep us doing things that would provide for ourselves and others and not have us just constantly clash and make problems everywhere. Now, I might not have gotten all of those systems perfectly right, and there's many more, but it's not really about exactly what they all say. It's more about the idea that they all have a position about what people are fundamentally like, and so we need to create this system that fits that fundamental way of people, and then we'll be successful. But what's fascinating and just compelling about The Dispossessed is that Le Guin isn't seemingly saying that. Le Guin is showing the honest truth about human nature, which is that we aren't just one thing, and not just one thing motivates us, and everybody doesn't just do the same thing all the time about all their different passions and desires and work, and we're very different, and that's what creates the problem. So first we can look at Anaris, which is Le Guin's idea of an anarcho-communist system. So all these people go to this planet and they set up this system, and they live that way, and they're seemingly successful mostly, right? So she presents a lot of ways that the system really works for them. They are cooperative. They feel that their work is meaningful. They get to choose what they're passionate about to do, but then they also do that sort of communist idea of having like shared work that helps everyone. And it's not something that everybody loves to do, but they do have some choice in it, and they feel success in that they're doing what's good for the community. They feel like what they're doing matters. They also care for each other. Like, there's not, one of the most interesting parts of the society is that they don't keep their children living with them. They can when they're younger, or they don't have to. They have sort of like care centers for the children, and they bring them there. And then when they're babies, they can stay with the family, but then when they get older to like school age, they start staying at the school, but they can still have a relationship with their family. And this is very different from the way that we live now, in that we really do see children as like property almost. Like, people see their children as human beings, but it's like they're mine, right? They're my human beings. And Le Guin is clearly trying to explore that idea and poke a few holes in it by presenting this concept of the children being able to go live in these care centers and be their own person that is part of the community, but not owned by anybody else. And the main character, Shevik, struggles with that because he does see his family as his. So this is a really interesting piece of the society that she's built here, but it's also something that in the society that she's built works as like a common care. Like, people are taking care of each other in the society in all different ways based on work and childcare and building knowledge. And since there's no laws in Anaris, the way that they get people to cooperate is based on this idea of social obligation and the guilt that people feel if they aren't doing their part, if they're just sitting around and not being a contributing member to the community. Now, I don't think that Le Guin's idea of the society is perfect. Like, I can't poke any holes in it. There are some things that I'm like, I don't know if people would really be like that, or I think more people would try to be independent or would go against the community or whatever. So I'm not saying that this picture she's presented is a perfect one of how things would exactly work, but it's the most realistic one and the most human one that I have ever seen presented. Like, it's nothing like Anthem by Ayn Rand, which is completely over the top, right? Le Guin is creating a society that actually feels believable, even if there's little pieces where I'm like, I don't know if it would work exactly like that, but you can see how it's coming together, and the people can have this way of living and belief that creates this kind of society. But that's not where Le Guin stops, right? Anaris isn't a utopia, and she doesn't mean for it to be. She recognizes human nature, and there's flaws in the system of Anaris that she presents as well, and a lot of those come back to the ideas of power and people desiring power. And there's academic gatekeeping in the society. There's people who do end up better off in better positions than others. And there's a lot of scarcity. There is famine. And one of the biggest problems that we see with the main character, Shevik, is that there is this stagnation in the society when it comes to growth, when it comes to technology and advancement and that kind of thing that Shevik really wants to pursue, but isn't always a fundamental issue for the rest of the people in the community. And since this is a community where everybody is cooperating, that matters. She presents it as something like he can't just do whatever he wants and pursue his own passion, even though he can pursue it, just he gets stuck in a lot of ways because of the way that this community is set up. So it's not like this society of Anaris is the answer to everybody's problems in the ideal community. It's another type of community that focuses on different desires and purposes and values, but it still has problems no matter what. So now, if we look at Eurus, which is the other world, the other society in the Dispossessed that Le Guin presents, that is a lot closer to like how we live in the US. And that is more of like a capitalist society where they have a lot of materialism and they have a lot of wealth and there's huge inequality. And there's a ton of luxury for some, but then for others, there's a lot of suffering. And for the majority, there's a lot of suffering. And there's clear power structures, and the people who have the wealth and who are in power make the decisions, control everything, and they have the luxury. And I think one of the most interesting ideas that Le Guin presents with the society as well is when Shevik sort of starts to realize that once he goes there, his work becomes meaningless to him. So the whole reason that he goes there is because he wants to advance his ideas about physics and give that to society and make it so society can do more and understand more. But once he's on Eurus and he knows that his ideas will be used for profit, for the luxury of the wealthy, and in a way that can harm and will likely harm others, his work doesn't even feel like it matters anymore. It feels like nothing, and he doesn't really care about it. So this is a well-known Marxist idea in his philosophy, that this idea of sort of capitalist and materialistic society, work often becomes meaningless because you're doing it for the paycheck instead of anything else. So it doesn't really matter to you anymore. And we see this with Shevik. His work matters to him. In Anaris, even though it's so hard for him to move forward with it there because of the structure of the society, he can move forward with it much easier and have tons of help on Eurus because of the structure of that society, but then the work doesn't matter anymore. So in both societies, there's major issues. And I think it brings up a really interesting question of, even if you can live in a society with great luxury and you could have great wealth, then what does any of that matter? What do those comforts do for you when everything you do becomes meaningless? It really becomes this sort of interesting tension between Anaris and Eurus, where on the one hand, Anaris is a desert planet and it's so hard for them to live, but they have so much meaning there, but they have very little comfort, and they can have some extreme suffering, like when there's famine. Whereas on Eurus, there's much more luxury and comfort, but there's so much less meaning and connection between people. Which brings me to another question that I kept thinking about while I was reading this book. And I think that Le Guin wants us to ask this. I think I'm supposed to have been thinking about this while reading it, which is, does the community in Anaris succeed because of the scarcity of that system, or of that planet? So on Anaris, it's such a struggle for them to meet their basic needs. Does that make it so that they have to be cooperative? Because if they weren't, they would all die. They can't have a system there where one person is hoarding everything and lives a life of luxury and everybody else is sort of contributing in a way that these few people can still hoard. I don't know if would be possible on Anaris. And is Le Guin saying anything about if we need some scarcity in order to be that cooperative, in order to have a system where we can cooperate in the way that they do on Anaris? I don't know the answer to that, but I do think that it's an interesting question. So I think the most interesting idea or questions that this book brings up isn't about which political system is best, or even necessarily what the flaws in the two systems that are presented are. So what's most interesting in this book isn't the question about which political system is best. It's much more the question about what human desires do we have to wrestle with, and what in our nature creates problems, and what do we have to do in order to live in a community where we have the things that we desire, but we don't destroy each other or create systems that collapse in on themselves. And some of the things that Le Guin presents here are things that we have all probably considered, which is the idea of belonging and having freedom and personal growth and security and at least some basic level of comfort in our needs met. So I think the question really, or I think the book really looks at human behavior and human nature and our desire for power, and how that can create problems, and how a lot of our desires can often be in conflict in a way that makes it so that there isn't an ideal system. We just have to keep in the forefront of our mind what it means to be human and how we can work in a community with all these conflicting needs and desires. And the answer to that question that I think Le Guin is presenting at the end of the novel, again, isn't about a particular system that is going to work better. She's not saying we should be communist or we should be capitalist or we should be libertarian or whatever, even though I'm sure she does have her own opinions about what she thinks would work. But I think what the book is really saying is that we need to keep that revolutionary spirit that Shevek has until the end, and that he shares with some of the people on Eurus when they're trying to make a better world and fight back against the powerful system there. She's showing that healthy systems are going to be ones where they can criticize themselves, where people can look inward and not just idolize the situation that they're in because it's what they know and because they're there, but that they can see the issues arising and try to balance those out in some way. It isn't about overthrowing governments, but about being able to criticize the things that you are closest to, ideas that you are closest to, and look at the power structures and how they're actually working and who's benefiting and who's being left out, and be willing to make changes to keep things balanced and desirable for the people who live in the society. So at the end of the day, then, I think that this book is amazing because it really made me think, and I just think it really gets into the reality of humanity, which is the thing that I love. It's not just plot driven. It really presents an accurate depiction of how people are and how we work in communities and systems together and the problems that arise.